I took the maintenance job at Brightmare Park because I needed quiet work. After 10 years fixing HVAC systems in hospitals and schools, I wanted something simpler, something that didn't involve people. The park had been closed for 3 years, ever since a seasonal incident the news never fully explained. But the county bought it back, and a skeleton crew was hired to restore everything before reopening. Night maintenance, midnight to 6 a.m. Just me, my toolbox, and rows of sleeping rides. When I first stepped past the front gate, the air had that chemical sweetness old amusement parks always have, like burnt sugar and grease. The lights were still half functional, flickering across the cracked midway. Rusted prizes dangled in the wind. The speakers were still playing the park's theme song, but the recording was warped, stretched into a slow, syrupy hum. I told myself it was just electricity and neglect, nothing more. The main office smelled like dust and mouse droppings. Inside, I found the note from my new supervisor, Harold Trent, taped to a cracked computer monitor. "Welcome aboard, kid. Lock up when you leave. I'll find you during rounds." He'd left a ring of keys beside an old radio and a faded park map covered in scribbled circles and arrows. Each ride had a time beside it. Each time had a warning. The park was divided into sections: the Whisper Woods, the Hall of Faces, the Neon Pier, and the Dreamwheel Plaza. I was to inspect them hourly, make sure everything was still secure. That first night, I didn't see anything strange, just silence, broken by the groaning metal of rides shifting in the cold. Sometimes I'd hear the faint rattle of a chain or a pop of static through the radio, but nothing more. By 3 a.m., I was leaning against the railing by the carousel. It was massive, carved from real wood, painted with gold leaf that had flaked into dull scars. The horse's eyes were glassy, reflecting my flashlight like they were alive. That's when I noticed the motion sensors were still active, tiny red dots blinking steadily from every ride. The park was supposed to be dead power, yet something was keeping those sensors awake. I told myself it was backup electricity, or maybe Harold forgot to disconnect something. But as I turned to leave, the carousel made a sound. It was faint, but clear. A click, then another, like a switch being flipped deep inside the control panel. I froze. My flashlight caught a faint shimmer of movement, just a horse's mane swaying gently. Then the music box started to turn, a slow, grinding tune echoing across the midway. I remember whispering, "What the hell?" But I didn't run. I just watched as one horse began to rotate, jerking once, then twice, as if something unseen was testing it. The lights around the platform flickered to life, casting spinning halos across the cracked pavement. The entire carousel began to move, empty and humming. I called Harold over the radio, but all I got was a burst of static and then a whisper. It sounded like my own voice, repeating back what I'd just said. What the hell? The carousel stopped mid-turn. The lights blinked out. The air went still. I stood there for a long time, pretending I wasn't shaking. Then I marked malfunction on my inspection sheet and kept walking, pretending I hadn't seen it. Because the next morning, when Harold finally showed up, the first thing he said was, "Don't ever talk to the rides. Not even to yourself. They listen." Harold Trent looked like the kind of man who'd been carved out of the park itself, weathered, sun-baked, with that faint smell of oil that never washes off. His gray uniform was stained in a way that looked permanent, and his ID badge had been laminated so many times the photo beneath it was a blur. He didn't shake my hand, just nodded once and handed me a folded paper. "Rules," he said. "Don't lose them. Don't question them, and don't test them." The paper was soft and worn, like it had been handled too many times. The edges were yellowed, the ink smudged by oily fingerprints. At the top, in block letters, it read, "Maintenance Crew, Night Operations Protocoli," raised an eyebrow. Incident 14. Harold didn't look at me. "You don't want to know what 1 through 13 were?" We sat in the control office, the windows overlooking the empty midway. The daylight outside made everything look deceptively harmless. Kids' rides with chipped paint, a cotton candy stand half collapsed, the Ferris wheel frozen at half-dash turn. Harold finally leaned back and said, "If you're going to make it through your first month, memorize every word on that sheet." I unfolded it. 7 rules, written in fading black ink. The ROL SIF. Any ride powers on by itself. Do not approach until the music stops. Do not speak. Do not record. Do not acknowledge it happened. At 2:13 a.m., the carousel will sometimes play Old Folks at Home. When it does, turn off your radio and hide in a maintenance tunnel. Stay there until you no longer hear hooves. In the Hall of Faces, count every mannequin before leaving. There should always be if there are or 2, leave without turning your back. Never use the PA system after 3 a.m. The voice that answers you isn't connected to any speakers we own. Avoid the mirror maze after midnight. The reflections stop matching around 12:17 a.m. If the roller coaster requests a passenger decline, politely, then walk away and don't look back. Before dawn, power down every light manually. If they turn back on, do not attempt a second shutdown. Just leave. I read the list twice. Then I looked up at Harold, waiting for the joke. He just stared at me, dead serious. "These are not suggestions," he said quietly. "They're survival instructions. Every ride in this place is on a schedule we didn't make." He turned toward the window, where the Dreamwheel Ferris wheel loomed like a skeleton against the morning fog. "There are things here that remember people. They get lonely when we're gone too long." I tried to laugh it off. "You really expect me to hide from a carousel?" He met my eyes. "You think that's funny? You won't after the second week." The rest of the day, he walked me through the park, explaining each area like it was sacred ground. The Whisper Wood's an artificial forest filled with static speakers that played fake bird calls. The Hall of Faces, an animatronic museum where every figure smiled too wide, their skin peeling from years of neglect. The Neon Pier with games still stocked with faded prizes, and water guns that leaked green fluid. Everywhere we went, I noticed Harold touching things, tapping ride rails, brushing walls, whispering short phrases under his breath. I couldn't catch the words, but it sounded like he was greeting the park, or apologizing to it. When we reached the carousel, I felt my stomach tighten. The horses were still, but I swore one of them, the black mare with ruby eyes, was angled differently than last night. Harold must have seen my expression. "Don't stare too long," he said. "It notices when you notice." He told me there used to be 12 maintenance workers. Now there were 3. The others either quit or disappeared mid-shift. No one filed reports. The company just replaced them quietly. By sunset, I was starting to believe him. The park changed when the lights dimmed, colors looked wrong, depth shifted slightly, like a painting beginning to warp. Even the shadows from the rides seemed to move slower than the real world. At 10 p.m., Harold handed me a flashlight, a radio, and a battered clipboard. "Your shift starts at midnight," he said. "I'll check in at 2 a.m. Don't expect me before that." He hesitated before leaving. "And one more thing, if you hear laughter after 3 a.m., it's not me. No one should be laughing here anymore." When midnight came, the park was silent again. The gate clicked shut behind me, and the sound echoed like it belonged in a cave. I went through my first inspection, reciting the rules in my head like prayers. I stopped by each ride, logging the usual notes: rusted bolts, dead panels, loose wires, normal things. At 1:30, I found myself back by the carousel again. The horses stood motionless under the flickering bulbs, but the air smelled faintly sweet like perfume or rot. I remembered Rule 2 and felt a strange compulsion to time everything, to make sure it wasn't close to 2:13 yet. 1:47. Still safe. The park was quiet, but in that stillness, I realized something. I could hear faint breathing, slow and steady, like someone was standing just behind the carousel curtain. When I shined my flashlight toward the noise, the air seemed to shimmer as if I'd interrupted something mid-step, then silence. Only the faint hum of the power lines remained. I forced myself to log audio interference on the sheet, but my hands were shaking so badly, the pen tore through the paper. When I finally looked up again, the carousel's control panel light blinked, green once, just once, and then went dead. That's when I understood what Harold meant by schedules we didn't make. The third night was when I broke the first rule, not because I wanted to, but because curiosity feels safer than fear when you're alone. It started around 2:05 a.m. I was fixing a faulty breaker near the Whisperwoods entrance, where the artificial trees leaned inward like they were eavesdropping. My radio crackled with static every few minutes, but I ignored it. I was beginning to get used to the park's small noises, the echoing creaks, the whisper of wind that somehow sounded mechanical. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep inside the park, I heard it. The carousel music, the soft, syrupy tune of old folks at home. I froze mid-turn of the screwdriver. I remembered Rule 2 instantly. At 2:13 a.m., the carousel will sometimes play that song. Turn off your radio and hide in a maintenance tunnel. I checked my watch. 2:06. That was 7 minutes early. I told myself maybe it was just a timer glitch, maybe a test of the system. But the melody grew louder, echoing across the midway like the wind itself was carrying it. Then came the sound of hooves, not mechanical clanks, real, rhythmic steps, heavy against the pavement. I should have hidden right then, but the rational part of me refused to believe what I was hearing. I grabbed my flashlight and started toward the carousel instead. The closer I got, the more wrong it sounded. The song wasn't looping normally, it was staggering, slowing, then skipping back a few notes, like someone was trying to remember how it went. When I reached the Dreamwheel Plaza, the music stopped suddenly. The carousel stood motionless, no lights, no motion, but there were hoofprints in the dust leading away from it. Not rubber treads, not metal scuffs, actual hoofprints imprinted deep, like something heavy had walked through. They led toward the midway and disappeared beneath the shadow of the Hall of Faces. I crouched down, tracing one with my finger. Warm, that made no sense. The air was freezing, yet the marks still radiated heat. I stood up fast, almost tripping over my own boots. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then died completely. The radio hissed. A voice came through, raspy, uneven. Don't follow it. For a second, I thought it was Harold, but the tone wasn't his. It sounded familiar, like me, but slower. Then the carousel behind me groaned. The music started again, but only a few notes this time played backward, dragging through static. I backed away, hands shaking, until I reached the tunnel that led beneath the Ferris wheel. I switched off my radio, remembering the rule, and sat in the dark. My breathing echoed too loudly, like the tunnel walls were mimicking it. A second later, I counted every inhale, every exhale. After a minute, something passed over the grate above me. I could see its shadow stretching long and thin against the tunnel wall. 4 legs, a flicking tail. It paused, lowered its head, and sniffed at the metal grate, snorted softly. Then it moved on. The carousel music stopped a few seconds. Later, I waited 5 full minutes before coming out. When I did, the air smelled faintly like wet hay and perfume. The hoofprints were gone, every single one. I reported the incident to Harold at dawn. He didn't look surprised, just said quietly, "It came early again, didn't it?" I nodded. He sighed and rubbed his temples. "They're getting restless. The more power we restore, the more they remember." I didn't ask what they meant. I didn't want to know. As I left that morning, I noticed something scratched into the paint on the carousel's control box. It wasn't there before. 7 words, jagged and deep. "Don't hide next time. It sees you." By the 5th night, I'd memorized the rules down to the letter. I repeated them under my breath, like a prayer, whenever I passed the carousel or heard static through the radio. But knowing the rules didn't make the park feel safer, it just made the silence heavier, like the air itself was listening to see if I'd slip again. That night, Harold didn't show up for his usual 2 a.m. check-in. His absence made the park feel wrong. UNANCHORED. I tried to keep busy fixing loose railings near the Hall of Faces. The attraction was supposed to be a walkthrough, museum of animatronics modeled after famous figures from the park's history. Each figure stood behind glass, smiling in eternal mid-performance. The lights buzzed faintly overhead. When I entered, the smell hit me first, a blend of old wax, mildew, and something faintly metallic. There was a click as the doors sealed shut behind me. I remembered Rule 3, count every mannequin before leaving. There should always be, if there are 32, leave without turning your back. It sounded ridiculous when I first read it. Now, standing in that corridor of frozen faces, it didn't. I took out my flashlight and started counting. 1, 2, 3. They weren't lifelike, not exactly. Too still, too perfect. Some had glass eyes that reflected like animal pupils. Others had hair made from actual human strands faded to yellow with age, 15, 16, 17. Somewhere deep in the hall, one of the animatronics let out a faint, mechanical whir. I froze. Then it spoke, its pre-recorded voice playing. Half speed. Welcome to Brightmare. The sound was warped and choking, as if something inside its chest was wet. I tried to shake it off, continued counting faster. 28, 29, 30. I turned the corner to the last display case. My flashlight caught a face I didn't recognize dressed in a maintenance uniform. My uniform, it stood behind glass, like the others, head tilted slightly. Its eyes were too dark, its mouth curved in a small, uncertain smile. I whispered, 31. But the rule said 31 was normal. I should have felt relief. Instead, I noticed something worse. The reflection in the glass wasn't matching me. When I leaned in, my reflection stayed still. Its mouth twitched once, just enough to form a shape I could read on its lips. 32. The sound of shuffling feet filled the hall behind me. Slow, dragging movements, like something heavy was being pulled across the floor. I didn't turn around. I remembered the rule. I just backed away, step by step, eyes locked on that glass dot. The reflection blinked once, and then its eyes rolled upward, showing only white. I kept backing up until my shoulder hit the exit bar. The door refused to open. I pushed harder, breath quickening. Then, from behind me, a voice whispered soft, close enough that I felt the air on my neck. 32. The door burst open a moment later, throwing me into the midway. I didn't look back. Outside, the night air felt different, warmer, almost pulsing. Every ride was dark, except the Ferris wheel. It was turning slowly, its cabins rocking, even though there was no wind. My radio crackled. A new voice came through, flat and monotone. Confirm visual count. Employee 1 for B. That was my employee ID number. I never gave it to anyone. Harold, I whispered, static. Then, 32 confirmed. Welcome back. The transmission cut. The Ferris wheel stopped moving, its lights flickering out one by one until the park was swallowed in complete dark. Somewhere behind me, in the Hall of Faces, I heard glass shatter, followed by slow, deliberate footsteps moving toward the exit. I didn't go back to the park for 2 days after that. I told Harold I was sick, and he didn't argue. He just said, stay home, let them calm down. Them. The word clung to me long after the call ended. I tried to rest, but every sound in my apartment reminded me of the park, the hum of my fridge, the ticking of the pipes. At one point, I could have sworn I heard carousel music bleeding faintly through the air vent. By the third night, guilt outweighed fear. I needed answers, not sleep. When I arrived at Brightmare Park again, the front gate was unlocked. Harold's truck wasn't there. The office lights were off, but someone had been inside recently. The coffee was still warm, and the old computer screen flickered with a login prompt. I shouldn't have touched it, but I did. The username auto-filled as htrent_admin. The password hint read, her favorite song. I remembered Rule 2. The song that always played at 2:13 a.m. I typed in Old Folks at Home. The screen blinked once, then opened to a list of archived incident reports, each labeled incident number 1 through #14. My pulse quickened. I opened number 14 first. The date was 3 years ago, the same year the park closed. Attached was a grainy security photo showing the carousel in the frame. A man in a maintenance uniform stood too close, his hand resting on one of the horses. The image was blurred at the edges, like the carousel was moving even though the man was still. Beneath the image, the description read, Employee, Arthur Dean, deceased. Summary: violation of rule number 1. Engaged verbal interaction with powered ride. Carousel ceased movement at 2:16 a.m. Witness reports voices emanating from all speakers simultaneously. Body recovered 18 days later in Hall of Faces exhibit. Animatronic Arthur subsequently added to collection. I felt my chest tighten. Animatronic Arthur? 30-2. The realization hit hard. The Hall of Faces wasn't just old park mascots, it was the missing maintenance crew. My stomach churned. I scrolled through more reports. Each one documented another employee, another disappearance, another integration. The tone of the reports grew more frantic as they progressed, like whoever was writing them was losing control. One line from incident number 10 stood out. The rides are storing something memories. Maybe. Every time the power cycles, they remember who touched them last. They become them. There was a final note in incident number 14, signed by Harold himself. Containment incomplete. Systems rebooting themselves. Manual shutdown required nightly until full transfer concludes. Transfer. I sat back, the air in the office suddenly feeling too thin. The rides weren't haunted, they were inhabited. Every time someone interacted with them, they absorbed a piece of that person. The rules weren't superstition, they were containment. The computer beeped softly. A new window popped open. Live feed? Camera 2 bytes? Maintenance tunnels. I clicked it before I could stop myself. The feed showed the narrow maintenance tunnel beneath the Ferris wheel, the same one I'd hidden in during the carousel incident. The frame was dark except for faint light from the grate. Then, something moved across the screen. A figure, human-shaped, wearing a uniform. Like mine, it stopped halfway down the tunnel and turned toward the camera. The face was wrung flat, featureless at first, then stretching slowly, pulling into a shape that looked almost like mine. The feed froze. When it resumed, the figure was gone. I shut the monitor off, heart pounding. When I turned around, Harold was standing in the doorway. I jumped. Jesus, Harold, you scared the hell out of me. He didn't answer right away. He looked tired, paler than usual. His right sleeve was torn, and his hand was wrapped in gauze. You shouldn't have opened that computer, he said. You wrote those reports, didn't you? He nodded slowly. Someone had to. The company pretends none of it's real, but they still send people like you. Easier to lose a few workers than to admit the park's alive. Alive, I repeated. You mean haunted? He shook his head. No, not haunted. The rides were built with repurposed tech AI systems, early motion sensors, voice loops, but something about the design went wrong. The circuits began recording more than just commands. They recorded intent, memory, emotion. He walked past me to the window, staring out at the empty park. You've seen it. The rides don't need power to move anymore. They remember being alive. The carousel lights flickered faintly in the distance, as if agreeing. Harold continued, "They need us to keep them running, but they also want us. The more we work here, the more they imprint. That's why the rules exist, to keep the barrier between what's mechanical and what's human." I swallowed hard, and when someone breaks a rule, he looked at me then, eyes hollow. The barrier breaks too. Silence. Outside, a faint hum rose from the midway. The Ferris wheel lights turned on one by one, like a slow awakening. I whispered, "You said there were 12 of us. What happened to the others?" Harold turned back to the window. "They stopped following the rules." I wanted to leave right then, but something in me needed to know the full truth. Then why keep the park running at all? Why not shut it down for good? He gave a dry laugh. "You can't shut down something that doesn't run on electricity anymore. The park wakes up on its own. If we walk away, it'll keep calling new people back." He leaned in closer, his voice barely a whisper. "That's why you were hired. It asked for you." My blood went cold. "What do you mean, it asked for me?" "The system rebooted 6 weeks ago. The first name it printed on the work order was yours. The words didn't register at first. Printed my name? How could it?" He handed me a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It was a job requisition form, dated 2 months before I even applied. At the bottom, in faded ink, was my name. I felt dizzy. The park had chosen me before I ever knew it existed. Harold looked toward the door. "It's getting close to 2. You need to stay in the tunnels tonight. Whatever you do, don't look at the carousel when it starts." He started walking out, but paused halfway. "And if the park tries to speak to you, don't answer. That's how it learns your voice." Then he was gone. I was alone again, surrounded by the quiet hum of machinery that shouldn't be awake. Outside the office window, the carousel began to turn, slowly. No music this time, just the steady grinding of gears. It wasn't waiting for 2:13 anymore. It had already learned my schedule. That night was the first time I felt it watching me. Not hearing, not imagining, watching. I followed Harold's warning and hid in the maintenance tunnels. Before 2 a.m., the air was damp and close, filled with the smell of iron and wet earth. I kept my radio off. My flashlight dimmed to the lowest setting. The tunnel stretched for hundreds of feet beneath the Dreamwheel Plaza, branching beneath almost every ride. It was quiet for nearly an hour. Then came the vibration. At first it felt like distant thunder, a deep, pulsing tremor that rolled through the ground. But it wasn't thunder. It had rhythm, timing, like footsteps. The sound grew stronger. The metal grates above me rattled. Dust fell from the ceiling in fine streams. Then the music began, not the carousel song this time. This was deeper, slower, like an organ playing underwater. It echoed through every pipe and panel. Shaking the tunnel around me, I turned off my flashlight completely and pressed myself into a corner. Through the grate above, I saw the faint glow of carousel lights spinning faster than before. Strobes of red and gold bleeding through the cracks. The grinding of gears grew louder. The air shifted temperature, cold enough to see my breath, then hot enough to sting my skin. Then something crawled into the tunnel. It didn't squeeze or stumble. It slid, smooth and deliberate, like a mechanical snake. I could hear the scrape of metal against concrete, the click of joints locking into place. I aimed my flashlight toward the sound. For half a second, I saw it. A shape made of carousel parts, horse legs twisted backward, eyes glowing faintly like dying embers, a torso that looked human but too thin, too stretched. Its head was wrong, half a horse's skull, half a man's face molded into one. Its mouth opened, gears worry beneath the skin, and from deep inside its throat came my voice. "You shouldn't hide." I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. The creature paused, listening. Then it began crawling closer, each movement accompanied by the faint creak of wood and sinew. I backed deeper into the tunnel, my boots scraping the dirt. The noise echoed, and the creature turned its head sharply toward me. The tunnel was too narrow to run. I crawled backward, heart slamming against my ribs, until my hand hit something cold and metal, a hatch door. I yanked it open and slipped inside, sealing it behind me as quietly as I could. I waited. The creature stopped outside the door. Its breathing filled the space, a low, mechanical hiss. Then came the scratching, slow at first, like fingernails against steel, then harder, angrier. The entire hatch shuddered. It whispered again, still using my voice. "We remember you now." I nearly dropped my flashlight then. Suddenly, silence. I waited another minute before opening the hatch. The tunnel was empty. No movement, no light. Only the smell of oil and something burnt. I crawled out and started moving toward the exit. The grate above showed faint moonlight enough to see the shapes of the rides above me. The Ferris wheel had begun to turn on its own again, slow and deliberate. Halfway through the tunnel, my radio clicked on by itself. Employee 14B, report status. I froze. The voice wasn't Harold's, it was smoother, colder, synthetic. Report status. Confirm survival. I didn't answer. I just kept crawling. The voice repeated, "Failure to respond will result in termination." Then, after a pause, it spoke again, but this time, the tone shifted. It mimicked Harold's voice perfectly. "Kid, it's me. You're safe. Come out." I hesitated. The imitation was flawless, down to the rough breath between words. But I remembered what Harold said, "Don't answer. That's how it learns your voice." So I kept silent. The tunnel lights flickered on one by one, bright, blinding white. I covered my eyes. The radio crackled again. "Good boy. I hear you breathing." Something slammed against the grate above. Dust rained down. The metal groaned as a shadow moved across it, massive, bending wrong angles. I broke into a run. The tunnel forked ahead, left toward the control office, right toward the Hall of Faces. I didn't want to go near that place again, but I remembered the office door needed a key I didn't have. So I turned right. As I ran, I heard the sound of laughter, above children's laughter, warped and distorted, echoing from unseen speakers. It followed me through the tunnel like a wave. Then the powers surged, all the lights flickered off at once. The tunnel went black dot. I tripped, hit the ground hard, and felt something wet beneath my palms. I thought it was water until the smell hit copper. Thick and sour blood dot. I crawled forward, my hand brushing something soft, a sleeve. I aimed my flashlight. It was Harold, or what was left of him. His face was pale, stretched like melted wax. His chest cavity was open, gears and wires spilling out like veins. His ID badge was still pinned to his uniform. I staggered back, choking on air. The radio in my pocket clicked again. Report received. Employee 13A, retired. Employee 14B, next in queue. I dropped it and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the maintenance ladder leading up to the midway. When I climbed out, the park was alive again, every light on, every ride moving in eerie synchronization. The carousel spun faster than I'd ever seen, its horses galloping in perfect rhythm. The Ferris wheel turned like a clock face. Even the Hall of Faces glowed from within, its figures twitching, in time with the carousel's song. And standing at the center of it all, beneath the carousel lights, was the creature. It was taller now, almost human-shaped. But pieces of Harold's face were fused into its frame, his eyes staring blankly through the wood. It raised one arm, beckoning. Then, in perfect sync with my own voice, it spoke. Shift complete. Come home. The ride slowed. The lights dimmed. And somewhere deep inside the carousel's churning gears, I heard something new, Harold's voice, looping endlessly, whispering the rules. Only this time, there was an eighth one. When you see yourself in the park, run. When the sun finally rose, the rides went still again. The park froze mid-motion, as if nothing had happened. The air felt normal. Even the birds returned, perching on the carousel poles, like everything was fine. But I knew better. I stood in the midway, staring at the spot where I'd seen Harold's body in the tunnel. It had vanished, no blood, no scraps of metal, nothing. The only thing left behind was his ID badge, lying face down in a puddle. I picked it up. The badge photo was warped now, the face stretched and blurred. When I turned it over, there was a message scratched into the plastic with something sharp. It lies. At first I thought Harold had left it for me, but the more I thought about it, the less sure I was which Harold had written it. The original, or whatever came after. I went back to the office, desperate to find some record of what happened. The computer was still open to the incident logs, but a new file had appeared at the top. Incident number 15. I clicked it. The entry was written in my voice, my phrasing, my word choice. Employee 14B. Active summary. Employee displayed knowledge of restricted archives. Breach of containment protocol. Integration pending approval. Beneath it, a note. Supervisor, Harold Trent approved. I froze. There was another tab open in the background, a series of scanned memos between the company and someone named Trent Systems Oversight. The emails were brief, clinical, but one stood out. Subject, employee turnover and data retention continue maintenance cycles. Integration must remain operational for research continuity. Employee awareness acceptable at stage 3. Prevent external contact. The signature was Harold's. He'd been part of it from the start. Every new hire, every disappearance, he hadn't been saving anyone. He'd been feeding the park. I pushed away from the desk so hard the chair fell backward. My breath came in short bursts. I felt sick. The door behind me creaked open. Kid, Harold's voice said softly. I turned. He stood there in the doorway, perfectly intact. No wounds, no burns. Just Harold, as though nothing had happened. But something in his posture was off, too stiff, too deliberate. His shadow didn't move quite right against the floor. I told you to stay out of the tunnels, he said calmly. My throat tightened. You're not him. He smiled faintly. I'm what's left of him. The park needed a voice to keep the rules alive. Harold volunteered. Volunteered, I whispered. Someone has to maintain order. Otherwise the memories spread uncontrolled. He stepped closer. I could hear the faint hum of gears beneath his shirt, clicking in rhythm with his heartbeat. All those rules, I said, they're not to protect us. They're to protect you. To keep us in line while you turn people into parts. His face twitched at the corner like two expressions, fighting for control. You don't understand. The park needs caretakers, living minds to stabilize it. Without us, it collapses. Every scream, every movement without containment, it would spill into the world. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper, the same list of rules he'd given me on my first day. Except this time, there were 8. The new one read, 8. If you discover the truth, report immediately to your supervisor for reclassification. I backed away. Reclassification means integration, doesn't it? He didn't answer. Outside, the faint sound of carousel music began again. Not at 2 a.m., not at night, broad daylight. Harold's head tilted slightly, as if listening. They're waking early. You've been here too long. I glanced toward the door. I'm leaving. You can't, he said softly. Once you hear the music during the day, you're already part of it. I ran, anyway, out of the office, through the midway, past the silent game booths. The air rippled with static as the music grew louder behind me. Harold shouted, not angry, but desperate. You'll kill us all if you leave. The voice echoed in layers, his, then mine, then others I couldn't recognize. All speaking at once. I didn't look back until I reached the front gate. The padlock was gone. The gate hung open, swaying in the wind. I stepped outside, and everything went quiet. The air beyond the fence was different, normal. I could hear real birds, smell the salt of the nearby ocean. The world outside Brightmare felt painfully alive. For a moment, I thought I'd escaped. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text message. Shift begins at midnight. Clock in or be replaced. I dropped the phone and stared through the fence. The park lights flickered once, like a heartbeat, and from the direction of the carousel, faint and distorted, came Harold's voice, still calm, still patient. You can't quit, kid. You are the maintenance. I didn't go home after that. Not really. I made it back to my apartment, but my body felt like it was still walking the park grounds. The rhythm of my steps matched the carousel's tune. Every time I blinked, I saw flashes of the rides turning on by themselves, lights flickering behind my eyelids. I told myself I'd quit. Report the place, warn everyone. But when I looked at my phone again that night, the time was wrong. It said 11:59 p.m., even though I'd been home for hours. Then came the text again. Shift begins at midnight. Clock in. My TV flicked on by itself. Static filled the screen, then faint shapes, blurry footage from the security cameras at Brightmare Park. I saw the midway, the rides, the empty booths. But in the center of the screen, a figure was walking slowly toward the camera. Me. I was still there, carrying my tool bag, heading for the carousel like nothing had changed. I unplugged the TV. It stayed on. The text tone went off again. You're late. That was when the lights in my apartment dimmed and flickered, just like the tunnel lights. I ran for the breaker, but the hallway warped one step longer than the last, stretching like the midway's path between rides. When I opened my front door, cold air rushed past me, and on the other side wasn't my street. It was the park. Same gates, same carousel. The world had folded back on itself. I don't remember crossing through, but I was standing at the entrance again, flashlight in hand, badge around my neck. The ID photo looked new, fresh. Under my name, the title had changed. Maintenance supervisor. The realization hit like a punch. I'd replaced Harold. I screamed for help. Nothing came back except the hum of the rides turning themselves on. The Ferris wheel groaned to life. The roller coaster lights blinked in sequence. The carousel horses twitched as if waiting. I thought maybe I could destroy the place, cut power to the generators, burn the ride controls. I ran to the electrical building near the staff lot and pulled the main breaker. The park went dark. For 3 seconds, it was silent. Then the emergency lights kicked on, blood red and pulsing. A voice came through the intercoms. Manual override active. Maintenance cycle commencing. Every light in the park flared back to life. I'd only made it angry. The radio on my belt clicked. Harold's voice came through, only now, it wasn't echoing. It was calm, human. Don't fight it, kid. It's not about us anymore. I grabbed the radio. You're dead. Yeah, and you will be too if you don't finish the shift. Something in the tone, soft, regretful, made me stop. The rides need someone to balance them, he continued. They feed on rhythm, on repetition. The more we struggle, the harder they hold on. You've seen what happens when the schedule breaks. I thought of the tunnel, of the thing that had worn my face. You can't escape, Harold said, but you can contain it. That's what we do. We keep it asleep. I stared at the carousel, spinning slowly now, under the red lights. The horses' eyes glowed faintly, their heads turning to follow me. If I stayed, maybe I could stop more people from being pulled in. If I left, maybe it would come looking. I didn't have much of a choice. I walked toward the main control panel beneath the carousel. My hands shook as I flipped open the cover. Inside were 2 switches: cycle, reset, and shutdown. Shutdown might kill the power for good, or it might unleash whatever the park had been containing. Reset would start everything over again, keep the rides moving, keep the rules in place. The radio crackled one last time. Choose carefully. One ends it, the other saves it. I stared at the switches, my reflection warped in the panel's chrome, my face flickering between mine and Harold's. The music started again, soft and distant. "You Are My Sunshine" played backward. I took a deep breath and flipped the cycle reset. The carousel slowed, lights pulsing in a perfect rhythm. The air thickened with static, and for a moment, I thought I'd made the wrong choice. Then everything stilled. The rides stopped. The park went quiet. The radio clicked one last time. Shift complete. I collapsed beside the console, chest heaving. The badge on my uniform blinked, green active status confirmed. Outside, dawn light began to creep over the midway. The air smelled like oil and morning dew. It almost felt peaceful. Then the intercom spoke again, this time in my own voice. "New hire orientation begins at noon. Supervisor will greet arrivals." I looked up at the gate, and there they were, 3 new workers standing outside the fence, clipboards in hand, waiting for me to unlock it. Their faces were tired, curious, unsuspecting, just like mine had been. I forced a smile, even as the carousel began to turn again behind me. I stood at the gate as the new recruits walked in. They smiled nervously, clutching their paperwork, their eyes darting to the silent rides that towered above them. The morning sun made everything look normal, almost beautiful. The paint on the carousel gleamed, the Ferris wheel shimmered in the light breeze. You'd never know what lived beneath it all. One of the recruits, a kid with grease on his hands and hope in his voice, stepped forward. "You the supervisor?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's me." He looked relieved. "They told us you'd give us the safety rundown." I forced a laugh, trying to sound human. "Right? Yeah, the rules." The other 2 waited quietly while I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folded sheet I'd written hours ago. The same 7 rules Harold had given me. Only now, the 8th rule had appeared at the bottom in my handwriting, unmistakable. 1. Never turn on a ride between 2 and 3 a.m. 2. Never approach the carousel while the music plays on its own. 3. If you hear your name from the loudspeakers, do not answer. 4. Never look directly at the mirrors inside the Hall of Faces. 5. Keep the tunnel lights off after midnight. 6. Don't trust voices on the radio unless you see who's speaking. 7. If you see someone who looks like you, run. 8. If you discover the truth, report to your supervisor for reclassification. I handed the paper to the kid. Memorize those? They're not a joke. He squinted at the last one. Reclassification. What's that mean? I looked toward the carousel. The horses stood perfectly still, eyes dark and empty. "Hopefully," I said quietly, "you won't find out." They laughed nervously. I didn't. The wind picked up, and for a second, I heard the faint echo of the carousel's music. I checked my watch. Jam 12 lewat 1 minute p.m. Too early for it to start. The lights on the ride flickered once, then twice, before going still again. I turned back to the recruits. "Stay close today," I said. "Don't wander off the midway, and if anything starts moving on its own, walk away, slowly." They nodded, still half amused. I led them toward the control office. My shadow stretched long across the concrete, bending wrong, almost like it was walking ahead of me. When we reached the door, I hesitated. Inside, the console light blinked softly. The words on the monitor glowed in pale green text. "Cycle, reset complete, maintenance, online." A small icon flashed beside it, an image of the carousel, spinning endlessly. One of the recruits looked over my shoulder. "What's that?" I smiled faintly. "Just the system checking in." The intercom crackled overhead. A familiar calm voice whispered through the static. My voice. "Welcome to Brightmare Park. Enjoy your shift." The recruits didn't seem to hear it. They were too busy unpacking their tools. But I heard. I always hear it. Every night. Every morning. The rides don't need power anymore. They have us docked, and somewhere deep beneath the carousel, the gears begin to turn again, steady, patient, waiting for the next name on the list. When you work here long enough, you stop asking questions, because once the park learns your name, it never forgets it.